Welcome to my field of dreams. It reaches far and wide. To you it might seem nothing much, but I stand here with pride. If you build it, they will come.
Hi, I'm Nemo James, singer, songwriter, and author, and I'd like to welcome you once again to my podcast, Nemo James Travel Diaries. This podcast is ad-free, but I hope you will forgive me for including short excerpts of some of my songs. If you would like to hear more of the songs I include, you will find a link to them in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. On this episode, we will be travelling to Sri Lanka, Colombo and Anuradhapura. 9th of January 2017. Our flight was with the excellent Emirates airline on an A380, a huge double-decker plane that looked like it had filled its full capacity of 519 passengers. It was a good flight, and even the food was okay. Who can argue with a sticky toffee pudding for dessert? After a short stopover in Dubai, we arrived in Colombo at 4 a.m. local time. I was dreading a long, chaotic queue at passport control, but we were through in no time. I had purchased tickets for some train journeys from an agent in Brighton, who told me they would be available at the airport at the Mobitel mobile phone counter. I wasn't expecting them to be there, but they were cheap, so it was worth taking the risk. To my surprise, they found my booking straight away, and a few minutes later, the train tickets were in my hand. I also bought SIM cards from them, so we would have local mobile numbers during our holiday. Even more surprising was that they connected to the internet first time, so I couldn't ever remember a journey ever going so smoothly. For the first 3 nights, we were staying at the Grand Oriental Hotel. It was a famous hotel in its day, but most of the reviews on Booking.com said it was well past its sell-by date. Their main promotional picture showed a smart doorman at the entrance welcoming the guests. On our arrival, there was a red carpet, and we did get a welcome, but it was in the form of a large rat. It stood by the front door like it was waiting for someone to let it in. What surprised me was that, although my experience of rats was very limited, those that I had come across were very nervous and ran off as soon as they saw me. This rat strolled past so casually that I thought it was going to ask me the way to the kitchen. By the time we had checked in and were in our room, it was 6 a.m. local time, so we had the choice of having breakfast or going to sleep. After a full day's travelling, it was no contest. We woke at around 1 p.m. and looked around our room. I had changed my mind about staying at that hotel a dozen times, but kept the booking out of curiosity more than anything else. With a Booking.com review score of 6.6, it was the lowest-rated hotel we had ever stayed at, but there was no question that it was once a magnificent hotel. We paid extra for a deluxe room, and yet it was still very cheap. It was a huge room, with a sitting room and a 4-poster bed draped in mosquito netting. We had to take the netting off because it was so dusty that it looked like it had never been washed. It was a dark room with dark furniture displaying countless scuffs left behind by the generations of guests that had gone before us. I had such mixed feelings about it, as there was no doubt that the lack of maintenance made it quite depressing, but at the same time, you could almost feel the history it contained. From the front, it still looked like a palace, but the back looked out onto a dockyard. We asked a tuk-tuk driver to take us to a shopping mall where we knew there was a food court. We were hungry and hot, and when you are unsure of a place, you can't go wrong with a shopping mall. Our friendly driver told us we were very lucky because it was the last day of a government sale, so they were selling gemstones very cheaply. We weren't interested, but he insisted. He drove through the traffic like a lunatic before mounting the pavement in front of a shop. We had expected him to take us to a market that sold gems for next to nothing, but it was a normal shop with prices much the same as England. We discovered later that shops paid tuk-tuk drivers to take tourists to them even if they didn't buy anything. Federika loved looking at gemstones but had no intention of buying anything in the first few hours of our trip, so after 15 minutes of high-pressure salesmanship, we left. Not only had the tuk-tuk driver taken us to somewhere we didn't want to go, but it was completely out of our way, so we had also paid him extra for the privilege. One of the first things we noticed was how friendly everyone was. We ate in a self-service restaurant, and after getting our food, we found there was nowhere to sit. A Sri Lankan man invited us to sit with him, and we started chatting effortlessly. The irony was that Federika and I were eating delicious Sri Lankan food, and he was eating pizza. We exchanged business cards, and an hour later I received a delightful email from him saying how lucky he was to have sat with us and that he had spent the last hour listening to my music. Early evening, we went to the Gale Face Hotel, which was far more of a grand hotel than ours, and inside there were walls full of signed pictures of all the famous people who had stayed there. It was by the sea, so we sat on the terrace with 2 Bellinis for company and watched the sunset. Breakfast in the hotel the next morning was an interesting experience. There was a large buffet, which was mainly Sri Lankan food. I love trying out new food, but not so much for breakfast. Most of the dishes were the kind of things you would have for lunch or dinner. Lots of curry and noodle dishes, roast potatoes, and all kinds of heavy-looking things. The only thing vaguely European was tiny chicken sausages and some hard-boiled eggs, but fortunately there were croissants and jam, which were all we needed. Our first visit of the day was to the Petta market, but as there weren't many tourists around, the stall holders soon pounced on us and demanded we take advantage of their special prices. If we showed any hint or weakness, they latched onto us like dogs sharing a bone. So when Federika showed interest in a pair of shorts, the salesman produced 6 pairs to choose from. Some were hopelessly too big, but he assured us that they only looked big because that was the style. Eventually, she settled on a pair she liked and asked about the price. He wanted 4,500 rupees, which was double what they cost in England. We laughed and walked away. We were 50 meters down the street when he came running after us, and we finally settled for 1,500 rupees, which was still not a great price, but we just wanted to get rid of him. Next morning, we hired a tuk-tuk to take us to the Gagaramaj temple. The driver followed us into the temple and gave us an unsolicited tour. He told us a few interesting things, but we would have preferred to have been by ourselves, as we felt he was rushing us through. When we got back to the hotel, his charge had risen from 200 rupees to 2,000 because of the tour we hadn't asked for and didn't want. The other reason for the price increase was that he had 4 children, so it seemed that tuk-tuk fares were not based on distance but on the number of children the driver had. We expected people to try it on, but this man was very unpleasant, and the charge was absurd, so I gave him 1,000 rupees and the most menacing look I could muster.
You got too much stuff, it's driving me insane. I've just fallen down those stairs again. One of these days when you ain't around, I'm gonna bury that stuff deep underground. But I know if I did, you would just buy more. Now you got your own parking space at the store. I know that you say you ain't got enough, so it's just as well. I got so much love.
That night, we still hadn't recovered from the trip and time difference, so we needed a good night's sleep, but we were woken at 5 a.m. by someone praying through a 1,000,000-watt PA system. It went on for nearly an hour, and my earplugs offered no protection, so even after it stopped, it took me ages to get back to sleep. On our last day in Colombo, Federika was flicking through a local magazine when she saw an advert for the full moon festival at the Kelaniya temple, which was about an hour away. Neither of us was keen on an hour travelling, and we nearly didn't go, but we were so glad we did. As we sat in the tuk-tuk in heavy traffic with thick black exhaust fumes filling the air, we wished we were back in the hotel, but the traffic soon thinned out, so it was only mildly unbearable. The Kelaniya temple was a huge square complex at the top of a lot of steps. There was a main temple in the middle, a lot of mini-temples around it, and various other places of worship scattered around. Each area had places where incense was burning, so the whole area was filled with intense smells, and the atmosphere was electric in anticipation of the procession to come. We had an hour to kill before it all started, so we left the complex and went for something to eat. We stopped at a very basic restaurant and ordered some noodles. The cook was throwing noodles onto a large grid and tossing them with 2 metal utensils. I don't know if it was intentional, but the way he was tossing the noodles created a rhythmic sound, so I went over to him and recorded it on my iPhone. I handed him my business card and explained, using sign language, that I would take his rhythmic noodle tossing and put it into one of my songs. I think he understood, as he looked delighted and gave me a scrap of paper with his phone number and Facebook page, so we became Facebook friends. We returned to the temple where the festival was about to start, but rather than a procession, there were little groups of performers scattered around the place, so we didn't know where to stand. There were also a lot of heavily shackled elephants dressed in magnificent robes that covered their heads and bodies. I don't think there is any animal with the ability to look as bored as an elephant does. We spent the next hour walking around and looking at all the performers. Having seen enough, we started to make our way out, but when we got to the steps that led to the exit, we found it blocked solid with people sitting down and waiting for the procession to begin. There were wide steps on all 4 sides of the temple, but they were all blocked with people. Finally, we came to a road that led out of the temple and realized that the performers we had seen scattered around the place were making their way to join the procession on that road. It meant we had a really good place to see the many different groups in various styles of dress, all dancing to the drummers that walked behind them. All the performers were men, including some who clearly loved being dressed as women. It was fantastic, but I had always found standing still in one place very tiring, so after another hour we decided to leave. We knew that the road where the procession was going was the only exit, so we sneaked down the side behind a group of performers, but reached a point where the police refused to let us go any further. It seemed that the authorities organized this amazing annual event and took care of every detail except how to avoid trapping thousands of people in the temple area. Their attitude seemed to be that everyone had to stay until the procession was over at around 2 a.m. Heaven knows what would happen if there were any kind of emergency. I had to laugh when I compared it to the health and safety laws in the UK. In some of the pubs I performed in, if people started dancing, I had to tell them to sit down because it was against fire regulations, despite the fact that they were dancing next to the large entrance doors. We found an official who pointed us to a car park area by the side, implying that it was the way out, but it was surrounded by a small wall. We joined other escapees who were climbing over the wall, but on the other side was a steep verge that should have been grass but was now just dust. It was very slippery, and at the bottom was another bigger wall that we had to let ourselves gently down till we reached the ground. There were families with children and an elderly man with us, and it felt like we were taking part in a prison break. When we got to the outer perimeter road, we still weren't free because of the procession, which was in full flow. There was a pedestrian bridge going across the road, but it was blocked with a metal barrier guarded by a grumpy policeman. I told him we wanted to leave, and he looked at me like I was crazy, but he did let us go across the bridge. After that, it was just a matter of squeezing through a solid mass of people at least 10 deep. It was a great night, and being held prisoner only added to the fun of it all. I expect those who slid down the grass verge to their deaths didn't find it so much fun. Our next stop was Anuradhapura, 200 kilometers north of Colombo. At last, we had committed ourselves to train travel, and although the station was chaotic, people were happy to help us. We asked a young man what platform we needed to go to, and he told us he was on the same train, so not only would he tell us when it arrived, but he would help us find our seats. There were lots of platforms with trains coming and going, making strange noises as if they were pleading to be put out to pasture. We had to laugh at the state of the trains and assumed they were commuter trains that local people paid next to nothing for and shared carriages with donkeys and chickens. We were waiting eagerly for our luxury tourist express to arrive when the young man came to tell us our train was ready to board and pointed to the one we had been looking and laughing at. He showed us to our seats, and we left our luggage at the end of the carriage unattended, which in any other country I would have felt uncomfortable about, but it felt safe enough there. I was looking forward to relaxing on the train journey, reading, doing some Sudoku, watching videos on my phone and generally chilling out. This illusion was quickly shattered when we started moving and rattling around so much that I was happy to settle for just keeping my head connected to my shoulders. I thought at least I could have a nice long sleep, but when I shut my eyes, it felt like there was an earthquake and someone was shaking me violently to wake me up. How on earth the train kept on the rails was a mystery. A couple of times, I thought we were doing an emergency stop, but the ticket collector seemed to accept being thrown forward a couple of meters as normal. I settled back and accepted that I would just have to sit there doing nothing for 6 hours, which for me was a nightmare. The scenery would have been enthralling for paddy field enthusiasts, but I can't say it did much for me. There was some interesting scenery, but that soon disappeared when darkness fell. One thing that caught my eye was the emergency handles, which were a great idea, but sometimes people abused them. Sri Lankan Railways solved that problem by putting their emergency handles in the roof of the carriage out of reach, which dramatically reduces the number of false emergency stops. The downside was that in an emergency, someone had to run through the carriages looking for an 8-foot man to pull the handle. I suppose if the train crashed and was lying on its side, then even the smallest person could pull the handle, but I suspect by then it would be too late.
I used to be the driver of a distant steaming train, a mighty beast at my command that laughed at wind and rain. I used to be a footballer with FA Cup in hand, but then the dream was over, the real world came along.
We finally arrived in Anuradhapura at 9:30 p.m., where a tuk-tuk driver was waiting for us as arranged by the hotel. Outside the station area were lots of people lying on blankets, so I assumed the waiting times for some of the connections must have been very long or even overnight. Hotel Heladiv was a small family-run hotel. We hardly saw anyone during most of our stay, despite the owners saying they were fully booked. It was a 2-story complex, and our room was on the ground floor with a lovely little terrace. The service was amazing, as a waiter came to our terrace with a menu, and after ordering, we waited until he came to say our meal was ready, and we took a short walk to the outdoor dining area. The plumbing in our room was eccentric. I finally discovered that for hot water in the wash basin, the tap turned to the right, and for the shower, it was to the left. I must have wasted 100 litres before I cracked the code. We hired a tuk-tuk driver for the day to take us around the circuit of temples, which was mandatory for all visitors. The driver charged only 3,000 rupees for the day, which was about £16. I was a bit concerned when he got out of the tuk-tuk using a crutch and limping badly. Something had happened to his foot, which instead of a shoe had a bandage displaying 2 toes short of a full foot. I had no idea if someone could drive a tuk-tuk safely with such a bad injury, but at least he wouldn't be able to force himself on us as a guide, as our previous driver had done. It turned out we were so happy with him that I thought in future I would ask hotels to provide us with a lame driver if possible. His name was Vagera, and we ended up hiring him for 3 days as he turned out to be a real diamond. He spoke good English, was intelligent, and quickly sussed out the kind of things we wanted to see. His injury was caused by dropping a large boulder on his foot, and apart from losing 2 toes, it would take at least 2 years and a few operations before he would be able to walk without a crutch. Our first stop was Abhayagiri Vihara, a major monastery dominated by a huge dagoba. A dagoba is a large, round construction built in solid brick with a pointy thing on the top. This dagoba claimed to have the largest number of bricks of any building in the world. As the building was solid and it was not possible to see beyond the outer layer, it was a claim that would be hard to contest. It was also claimed to have a hair of the Buddha enshrined inside. Like most ancient ruins we had visited, it was very impressive for 15 minutes. We asked Vagera to recommend a restaurant for lunch, so he dropped us off at a classy-looking hotel. The menu looked pretty boring, and most of it was European. The only item that was Sri Lankan was entitled chicken curry, which made it sound like the dish of the day in a naff English restaurant, but we ordered it anyway. When I asked for a beer, the waiter looked at me as if I were trying to score cocaine. We were near a temple, so they were not allowed to sell alcohol. We waited for ages for the food, but when it arrived, it was quite a surprise. The chicken curry was in a dish with just 2 small bits of chicken in curry sauce, but there were 8 side dishes, most of which we didn't recognize. The waiter explained what each one was, and although most of them were things we knew, we still didn't recognize them. The overall taste was amazing, and not only the best curry I had ever eaten, but the only curry not to leave me feeling bloated. After lunch, Vagera recited an extensive list of temples he wanted to take us to, but we just wanted to go back to our hotel for a swim in the pool. He still insisted on showing us a couple of things on the way back, but I quickly forgot them as by now all the temples we had seen had merged into one. I can, however, remember in detail the glass of mango juice and ice cream we had sitting by the pool. Next morning, we had a casual stroll around Anuradhapura, which was your basic noisy town. There were very few tourists, so it was hard to find a place for lunch, but we eventually came across a restaurant that offered Chinese and Thai food, except all the Thai food was off the menu. The waiter must have been in training for the Sri Lankan Grumpiest Waiter of the Year competition, and the air conditioning was far too cold, but the food was passable. Later that afternoon, Vagera took us to the ruins near the town of Mihintale. Knowing the kind of things that interested us, we stopped at an amazing banyan tree that was not in any of the tourist books. I had seen many banyan trees before, which were always very impressive, but this was in a class of its own. Banyan trees have roots that hang down from the branches, which reach the ground and take water from the soil. For centuries, monks had trained this tree so that the aerial roots formed an outer wall, leaving a large space in the middle. There was a little gateway into this tree and a small bench where I assume they took a rest from all the tree training. The next monastery was built around a man-made lake called Blackwater Pond, and there was something about the lake that I found haunting. A few locals were scattered around the water's edge washing themselves, and some women were washing clothes by bashing them against rocks. There was a strange quietness, and we liked it so much we decided to go back there the next morning and postpone our departure to Kandy until the afternoon. On arrival at the Mihintale ruins, a guide appeared out of nowhere who turned out to be a friend of Vagera, so I had no doubt he had been tipped off. We didn't mind on this occasion, as we were in the mood for a guide, and he was very good. Getting to the highest point of the ruins involved climbing 1,200 steps, but Federika suggested he drove us to the halfway point, not just to save our rapidly aging legs, but because it was getting late and we wanted to see the sunset. Even though we had bypassed half the steps, they still seemed never-ending. At the top, there were lots of ruins and a large monastery. No surprise there. On a plateau in the center was a shrine where it was claimed that Buddhism was first introduced to Sri Lanka. According to our guide, the shrine replaced what used to be a mango tree where the Buddhist monk Mahinda bumped into the local king. They started chatting, and after the king was asked a few questions to test how clever he was, the monk converted him to Buddhism, and most of the rest of the country followed suit. The guide didn't believe the story, but pointed out that all religions are based on unlikely stories, but that didn't diminish their value. Back at our hotel for dinner, we got talking to the owner, who had worked for many years in Padova in Italy. He really missed Italy and hoped to go back as soon as the hotel was running smoothly and he could leave it in the hands of another family member. Ugera took us back to Blackwater Pond, and at that time of day we were allowed to go into the forest area as the monks would not be praying there. It was only a short walk, but completely deserted, and quite eerie as the ghosts of monks past were uncomfortable about us being in their sacred place. After that, we sat by the lake where Federika did some sketches, and I wrote a song about the lake. We had got quite close to Varghera, and on the way back, he stopped off to show us his house, although sadly, his wife and 2 children weren't home at the time. It was a surprisingly big house with a lot of scope for extending, but it was very basic, and in common with all the houses we had seen, the brickwork was terrible but functional. There weren't many windows and none at all at the front of the house, where you would expect to see some. Back at the hotel, we said our goodbyes and a taxi was ready to take us on the 2-hour drive to Sigiriya. Thank you for listening to Nemo James Travel Diaries. Photos and videos of my adventures, together with my music and the books I have published, can be found on my website www.nemojames.com/travels. You will also find details of my mobile phone app, Wordbanker, which is designed to help you build a foreign language vocabulary. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. In the next episode, we will be traveling to Sri Lanka, Sigiriya, Kandy, and Ella.
Do you like the songs I've sung to you? Do you like the time that we've been through? Do you like my music? Do you like to sing along? Yes, we like the songs that you have sung. We like the friends that we've become. We like your music. We like your music. We like your music and the words of your song.